In this video, we're going to discuss receiving information that's subject to a non-disclosure agreement, or NDA, with a third party. The first thing to consider is the term of the NDA. And there's typically two terms identified in a non-disclosure agreement. The first is, when you receive information that's confidential under the non-disclosure agreement, how long do you have to keep that information confidential? As the party receiving the information, you ideally want this term to be shorter rather than longer, because while that term is in effect, you're at risk of the disclosing party accusing you of doing something improper with the information. The second term that matters is the length of period of time that the disclosing party can give information to you that's subject to the NDA. You also want to clearly identify this term, because while that term is in effect, any information, arguably, that the third party is giving you is going to be subject to the perhaps rigid constraints in the NDA. Another consideration is how the information that's being provided to you is designated as confidential. Ideally, as the receiving party, you want the disclosing party to have to clearly mark and designate confidential information as confidential and subject to the non-disclosure agreement. Sometimes confidential information is disclosed to you orally through a conversation. You want the disclosing party to have to clearly follow up that conversation in writing, saying, that conversation we had on this date, in this place, revealed confidential information. This was the topic of the confidential information, and here's a reminder that that information is confidential and subject to this non-disclosure agreement. Whether or not you're prohibited from actually disclosing this information to a variety of people in your company, you probably want to limit the number of people that have access to the information disclosed to you from the third party. The reason for this is twofold. First, to abide by the typical terms that are in an NDA and not disclose the information to people that don't have a need to access the information. And the other reason is for practical purposes. If down the road, people in your company independently come up with the subject matter of the information that was disclosed to you by a third party, you want to be able to clearly show that your company independently created this information and wasn't improperly taking it from the information disclosed to you by the disclosing party. You also want to have a clear mechanism in place for complying with the terms of the NDA. This means keeping confidential information in a secure location. Down the road, if something were to happen where the third party is accusing you of doing something improper with the information, you want to be able to clearly show what procedures you had in place for maintaining the secrecy of that information and complying with the terms of the NDA. At the end of the NDA, most NDAs say that you need to either return or destroy the information you've received from the disclosing party. And if you destroy it, you need to certify that destruction to the disclosing party. Many people forget to do this at the end of the term of an NDA, but it's important to do so. Again, this limits the risk that the disclosing party is going to accuse you of doing something wrong with the information, and as a practical matter, it limits the risk that you inadvertently disclose this confidential information to someone you're not supposed to. And one last point. It's also important to note that not all NDAs are the same. Just because something is titled non-disclosure agreement, it doesn't mean it has more significant terms embedded in it, such as intellectual property assignment clauses, non-compete clauses, non-circumvention clauses that may prohibit the receiving party from entering into a certain line of business or contacting certain parties that may already be dealing with the disclosing party. You want to read the document carefully and make sure you know exactly what you're signing. And this is a general overview of legal considerations when you're receiving information subject to a non-disclosure agreement.